Hey, welcome to my channel. This is your host, and today we have another installment in our series of videos where we attempt to answer some of the many weird, wild, crazy questions that you guys have sent in through the contact form. So let's get started. Today's question is, so you need to dispose of some nuclear waste. Where do you put it? Alright, this is a pretty good question, but before I can answer it, I feel like I have to give you a little bit of context. You see, humans have been utilizing the power of radioactivity for over a century now. Ever since we discovered how to split the atom back in 1938, we've developed all sorts of ways to harness the power of nuclear fission to generate large amounts of electricity for our homes and cities. But one of the downsides of generating power this way is that it comes with a certain amount of radioactive waste that we have to deal with somehow. Now, what exactly is radioactive waste? Well, in order to explain that, I first have to explain something called radioactivity. Now, most of you probably know this already, but just in case you don't, here goes. All matter is made up of different types of atoms. These atoms combine in various ways to form chemical compounds, molecules, and so on. For example, water is formed by 2 hydrogen atoms bonding with 1 oxygen atom. But all matter is ultimately made up of these tiny particles called atoms. Now, an atom is made up of a dense central core known as the nucleus. The nucleus contains positively charged protons and neutral neutrons. And then, orbiting around the nucleus are negatively charged electrons. And the number of protons determines what type of atom it is. For instance, an atom with 1 proton is always hydrogen, 2 protons is always helium, 3 is always lithium, and so on. Okay, so what does this have to do with radioactivity? Well, it turns out that not all atoms are equally stable. Some of them are more stable than others. And if they're unstable, they're likely to undergo a process called radioactive decay, which releases energy, and sometimes matter, in the form of radiation. In fact, it turns out that all atoms are technically unstable. They're just all on varying levels of instability. The only exception is an atom with 82 protons, which is the element lead. Lead is the only perfectly stable atom, so all other atoms will eventually decay into lead. Now, when an unstable atom undergoes radioactive decay, it turns itself into a different type of atom that's hopefully more stable. But the process of converting from one type of atom to another releases a tremendous amount of energy, which, as I said before, can manifest as radiation in the form of particles or electromagnetic waves. And this radiation can be incredibly dangerous to living things. After all, it is the same radiation that we use to kill cancer cells in hospitals. Okay, so now that we've established what radioactivity is, let's take a look at why it's such a problem. One of the biggest problems with nuclear power plants is that they produce a lot of radioactive waste that has to be stored somewhere. And this waste is super dangerous and remains radioactive for thousands or even millions of years. So you want to keep it away from people. You see, when you burn coal or natural gas or anything like that, the waste products are relatively harmless. Yes, they pollute the air and water and soil and all that stuff, which is bad for the environment and people's health, but it doesn't remain dangerous forever. Eventually, it either dissipates or becomes not toxic. But nuclear waste is different. The nuclear waste generated from fission reactions can remain radioactive for thousands or even millions of years. So it's not like you can just dig a hole and bury it. If you did that, there's a chance that in 1,000 years or 100,000 years, somebody might accidentally dig up that nuclear waste and inadvertently unleash deadly levels of radiation upon themselves. Or perhaps worse, rainwater could leach into the ground and eventually make its way into our drinking water supply and poison everyone on Earth. Now, of course, we don't actually have to worry about this happening anytime soon. Humanity has less than 10,000 metric tons of high-level radioactive waste, but we'll have to deal with that waste somehow. At some point, probably sometime within the next few hundred years. Now, one solution to this problem is to simply shoot the waste into outer space and abandon it up there. In fact, the Soviet Union briefly considered doing this. They looked into launching 50 nuclear reactors into orbit aboard their N-1 rocket, which was supposed to be a giant reusable moon rocket, but they never ended up doing it. And thankfully, we haven't had to deal with this problem yet because we haven't actually produced that much nuclear waste. But if we continue down the path of using nuclear power, especially if we start using breeder reactors that produce more nuclear waste, we'll have to deal with this problem sooner or later. Because even though we don't have that much nuclear waste yet, we do have quite a bit of low-level nuclear waste that needs to be disposed of. Right now, the United States stores its low-level nuclear waste in a handful of different sites across the country. Most of it is held in dry casks above ground, while other stuff is stored in various underground facilities. But the problem is that these storage facilities aren't permanent. At some point, they'll either run out of space or the integrity of the facility will begin to degrade. And we'll have to move the waste to a new facility. The US government is currently trying to address this issue by moving low-level radioactive waste from 17 different states into one single site in New Mexico. But even that won't be a permanent solution. Eventually, we'll need to figure out a permanent solution for storing our nuclear waste. And there are a couple different approaches we can take. One approach involves shooting it into outer space, although I admit that's probably not the best idea. There's also the option of dropping it into a deep hole in the ocean, although that's not the best idea either. It'd be better to drop it into a mine somewhere deep underground. The difficulty is finding a suitable location. An ideal nuclear waste dump would be a place that's stable geologically, far from populated areas, and far from aquifers that could potentially contaminate our drinking water supply. It would also need to remain stable for tens of thousands of years, so we'd have to make sure that no earthquakes, floods, meteor impacts, or angry mobs would disturb the nuclear waste. In fact, one of the main concerns is that at some point in the distant future, some group of people might come along who are unaware that the area is contaminated with nuclear waste and decide to build a city there, or maybe a farm. It's not impossible to imagine a scenario where some distant future civilization builds a water tower directly over a nuclear waste dump, inadvertently poisoning themselves and any other nearby settlements. In fact, there's one theory out there known as the technological singularity, which basically says that at some point in the future, technology will advance so quickly that we can't even predict what the future holds. Essentially, if you invented a machine that makes more advanced machines, then at some point, the machine that you built would become so intelligent that it would be capable of designing and building even more advanced versions of itself, leading to rapid advancements in technology. And nobody really knows what the long-term implications of that would be. Some experts think that it would be great because it could solve all of humanity's problems. Other experts think that it would be terrible because it could lead to human extinction. But either way, the point is that if we're talking about long-term solutions to nuclear waste, we have to assume that the future will be filled with lots of surprises. So we need to make sure that whatever solution we come up with is robust enough to handle any possible scenario. And that's why, after decades of searching, the US government hasn't been able to find a suitable location for a permanent nuclear waste dump. It's hard to find a location that meets all those requirements. In fact, we've only identified a single potential site, and it's located in southeastern New Mexico. It's an area known as the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, or WIPP, which is already used for storing transuranic waste. But the problem is that it's only big enough to store 20% of the country's low-level nuclear waste. So we'd need to find several more locations that are just as good, which is easier said than done. So to answer the question posed in the title of this video, the short answer is we don't know where we're going to put it yet. As for where we're going to put it once we figure it out, well, nobody alive today is going to be around to see it. That was our weird, wacky, crazy question of the day. If you like this kind of video, leave a like. If you didn't like this kind of video, well, you can leave a dislike. You can also leave a comment if you have some other suggestions for questions that we should try answering in future installments. And if you want to help support the channel, we've got links to our Patreon down in the description below. We'd love it if you consider supporting us. Thanks for watching.